Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Panic with Friends session. I'm Jay Mohan, the Executive Director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. I'm your host, and I'm very excited to have a great panel today. And we'll be talking about startups and investments. I think somebody, which I completely agree, I started a couple of companies, so I will agree with this quote. Which said starting your own business is like riding a roller coaster. There are highs and lows, and every turn you take is a twist. The lows are really low, the highs can be really high, and you have to have a strong stomach to ride this. And that's why our panel today, I have to say, is really inspiring. Matt and Steve are founders of really interesting companies with innovative products. And an investor that joins in this ride, especially in the early stages, have to have pretty much the same stomach. And that's where I think Andy comes in, because he's part of an early stage investment group. So to jump on this roller coaster at that stage would be really challenging. So given that, without much ado, let me hand over to you guys to give a little bit introduction about yourself, your background, the company that you are running. So Andy, as the early investor in the group, why don't you start, and then maybe we'll go to Matt and then Steve.
Sure. Thanks, Jay. As Jay said, I'm Andy Long. I'm with Ben Franklin Technology Partners. I work as an entrepreneur in residence and portfolio manager with a number of the investments that we seek out and make early stage investments into here in Lancaster. Well, in central Pennsylvania, our territory covers about 32 of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. And I'm focused on the Lancaster, Lebanon, York, and Adams County areas. So happy to be here today with the folks from HU. Jay's been very kind to our organization in the past, and it's the least that we can do to kind of, return the favor. As far as my career is concerned, I was born in this area, born and raised in Lancaster. Did a 4-year layover in Denver, Colorado, as part of job transition. I've founded a couple of tech companies, mostly bootstrapped them as opposed to take early stage investment. The remainder of my career has been in sales and in strategy for marketing and or marketing technology, focused on e-commerce. And so it was a local firm, Listrak, that sent me out west initially. Spent some time with eBay, PayPal, Magento, as well as did some services work in that arena as well, around the Shopify platform, BigCommerce platform, and again, pretty steeped in e-commerce technology and how the modern tools are kind of shaping commerce behavior. So that's a large part of the skill set that I bring to our client list and the investments that we make at Ben Franklin.
Very cool, Andy. So welcome to the program again, Matt.
All right. Hey Jay, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here. Matt Campagna, founder and CEO of Reflection. Reflection improves athlete on-field performance by training visual and cognitive skills like peripheral vision, complex reaction time, depth perception, so on, that help athletes see the field sooner and react before their competition. We started the company after my co-founder, also named Matt, slid headfirst into the boards during an ice hockey game. And his coach put him on the bench and he said, "Matt, where are you? What year is it? And who's president?" And that was their idea of taking care of Matt's brain. He was sidelined for months with a concussion. And so we became really passionate about taking care of athletes' brains, improving cognitive wellness, and helping them perform better on the field.
Very cool. Thanks, Matt, and welcome aboard. And Steve, my understanding is this is not your first startup, so it'll be very interesting to hear about, your current one.
Well, yeah, thank you. So I'm not the founder of the company. So my career has been largely in the finance arena. Actually, the company I work for now was a client of mine when I was doing a lot of consulting, strategy, finance, helping companies get money, commercialize business ideas and things of that nature. And I got a call about this company. They were acquiring the company from Gannett, private equity venture backed, and they needed someone to carve them off as a standalone entity. And they coaxed me into joining as their CFO because they were going to start to look at some acquisitions. So I joined as their CFO. This is back in, I guess, 2008, and then took over as the CEO in 2011 when the company wasn't doing very well. It's usually when you turn to the CFO. So, that's been since 2011. And, Farm Market ID, well, the one company we sold, which was a consumer data and analytics company, but we had acquired Farm Market ID in 2009. So Farm Market ID helps big ag companies, well, not just big ag companies, all ag companies understand the market for farmers, their crops, their acres, and use advanced analytics and modeling, remote sensing, so using satellite imagery to produce data and insights and things of that nature to help them make better decisions and resource decisions, things of that nature.
Previous ones, but thanks, Steve. So let's jump right into the elephant in the room, the pandemic, and how has that changed? Let's start with you, Steve, because you kind of took over from the CFO to the CEO role. With a company that's, you're looking to turn it around, and then, this whole uncertainty around the pandemic hits. What changed? Did your role change? How did the company?
Well, I guess I was well prepared to deal with coronavirus, since when I took over, we had 32,000 in cash and 160,000 in biweekly payroll. So this is a walk in the park comparatively, trying to dodge vendors and things like that, and trying to figure out how do we stay afloat and not let we had about 50, 60 employees. How do we not panic? How do we not show panic, yet they had no idea what was going on? So, but no, this is different. From a business side, at some level, it wasn't that hard because most of what we did was already in the cloud. And if it wasn't in the cloud, we had a lot of people that would periodically work from home so they could remote connect in. I think the biggest challenge has been twofold. Scared investors, and letting them know that, look, we're fine, we have it, we know what we're doing, we're in some ways already prepared for this. But then also taking some additional steps of, when you think about business continuity, you think usually of systems and things like that, but then there's people. What if someone goes down with coronavirus, and who's backing up for them? Who's going to do their job? Do we know where they keep their stuff? Do we know how they do what they do? So we went through a process of really kind of documenting those critical processes and put it out in a shared space, so that even simple things like logins, so that any of the management team could go get that. And if something happened, and it's one of those things you hope you never have to do, we haven't had to use it, but it's like an insurance policy. So, I think that's been, certainly a challenge, and things you don't think about, which is like, oh God, well, if something happened to me, I'm the only signer on the account. Who else has access to the bank account? Things that you just don't think about when you're not faced with things like that. So I think those have been sort of the biggest distractions. I think it's definitely changes how you manage and, flow of communication and things like that. Sort of forces you to sort of go beyond, realizing a lot of times information is at a smaller company, we're 16 people, happens organically, where, most of the people are in our Chicago office. I've been remote, but most people are there. So information and all that happens, and work happens organically. But now, you need to sort of work on the inorganic way to communicate information and make sure people are connecting and aligning, and we're not losing momentum.
So it's interesting because Matt, coming to you, on one side, a startup is always, you're always facing challenges. There is a lot of uncertainty, so you're kind of positioned to deal with it. But then this is something that's completely new that is not just impacting you, but your potential customers, investors. So how do you, what has...
Sure. My role is to make sure that our team has the resources that they need to be successful and to, help course correct when things don't go the direction that we expect. And in a pandemic, there, I think, is a lot more course correction that's needed. And our sales expectations changed because gyms, which are a large segment for us, had pretty much ground to a halt. Universities, academic institutions in general. Our fundraising had to be put on hold. We're in the middle of a round, and of course we had to, first and foremost prioritize the safety of our team and our customers. And so my role became very focused on cutting spending, shoring up as much cash as possible, constantly, communicating with our team and with our customers and our investors about what's going on, how we're responding, and they were all very helpful. Our customers gave us lots of feedback into what they needed. We actually ended up sending out care kits, cleaning kits to all of them. Our investors were, of course, very supportive. Ben Franklin included. Shout out to Andy. And we even launched a new product that was quite a way off in our roadmap, frankly, but was targeted at consumers. And so, we even changed the course of our product in response to the pandemic. And so far, we've seen great feedback. Consumers enter at a very different part of the buyer journey for us than B2B. So there's a lot of iterating and a lot of learning that's happening right now. But we're really happy with the progress of the product and where we are in spite of COVID, and have sold a number. Actually, we even sold one yesterday. So it's we're definitely getting momentum back and learning how to adapt in the environment that has surely changed, and we'll see what it actually comes back to and how things have changed permanently, or whether it's for the short term or long term.
Yeah, so that it's an interesting one, Andy, for you, because on one side you have all these companies that was ready to do their next round or go out and raise money, suddenly finding frozen out of these conversations. So does that put more pressure on Ben Franklin, organizations like you guys, to put more money into these existing companies to keep them floating, or do you reach out and find other organizations or investors to connect with them, or do you tell these guys, hey, you need to stay floating without much expectations?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well on the offset here, Jay, that for us to jump on the roller coaster as early as we tend to do as an investor, we're normally the first so-called institutional money into an investment. So a large part of what that helps to do for other investors looking in from the outside is to kind of de-risk those investments and provide them with an element of confidence that says the folks at Ben Franklin have scrutinized this, and they've been looking at it critically in ways that help us to have a more high level of confidence in putting some money in. So when you have a pandemic-like situation, we're not only an investor of our money, but we're also investing skills and resources that, use the PPP example. There were a lot of people who found themselves wrapped around the axle of, listen, we're so early in the business development of launching this and taking it to market that I don't have a dedicated resource that can go and research what it is that I need to be putting together for PPP or idle loans or any of the other various local funds that have popped up in the interim. So we immediately set out to create some resources and kind of put our finger on the pulse of how could you efficiently navigate PPP, effectively get that all under the understanding of, as Matt stated, his job quickly became, put your head above the fray and figure out how do I conserve as much cash as I can? How do I make my product more saleable with more limitations? I'd probably say that Reflection of our portfolio was one of the harder hit, but in converse to that, also one of the more innovative under the stress applied by something such as COVID. So it's a very difficult balance to walk, as you mentioned. We view our focus largely as how do we continue to keep the confidence levels high in the investors that are also participating in these companies in the same way that we are. But there are candid realities. I think you look across the investment ecosystem and a lot of people are simply saying, hey, we've got a signal that most of the cash that we have to invest needs to go to staving off any existing portfolio companies, falling on harm, limiting their cash, that type of thing. We want to invest in them. In fact, we just had our largest round of the year commence yesterday. And so we put a good chunk of money into a large number of existing investments. There were very few net new companies that received Ben Franklin investment, at least in this quarter, which we hope doesn't continue in the future. But the reality is, I think most investors, their thesis changes pretty quickly in these times to saying, we want to preserve those that we've already placed trust and investment into, because that investment is almost never limited to money. It also extends into networks and other services that we can bring to bear. But it's been challenging without question.
Yeah, I bet. I was looking at, this is always fascinating to see the stats around startups, right? And I think it has always been consistent that almost a huge percentage fails because of, not being able to raise money, but then equally high percentage fails because there is no market or they haven't really figured out the customer side of the story. My own experience has always been that. Andy, starting with you, this is, whether there is a pandemic or not, it's always the issue. So what's the kind of companies that are surviving within your portfolio that you see? What's different about those leaders that are able to figure this out that you are seeing?
Yeah, I think the two biggest hallmarks that we see are, one, they've found a pretty strong product market fit. They've worked hard at getting to that place. And so you kind of alluded to it. Has the market accepted what you're passionately putting energy into? Or is it still, you're kind of fumbling around to find that groove to get into? So those that have found a strong product market fit and worked hard to get to that place, that's a huge hallmark. The other one is just, and these two things are kind of hard to pull apart from one another, but doing the customer discovery and the research, both first party research and, second party research to say, where are these people congregating? How are their behaviors changing now that situations in their lives are different? And is there anything I can do to be visible to them, be more attractive to them now that my target customers' lives have updated? And part of, unfortunately, what we've seen to some degree is that certain businesses were built to only survive and thrive in an environment where pandemic isn't on the table, and that's somewhat of a kryptonite element for them to say, we just did not have enough elasticity in the way that our product fits the market to the point where whatever amount of revenue got taken off the table by pandemic was, a lethal dose. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, and I think that's a great segue to Matt to see, because you kind of touched on how you have seen new market or new customers, and so what's your leadership style been during this, and how have you?
Sure. I mean, the thing that we keep telling everybody on our team and beyond is that it's a very challenging time, but that means that there are a lot of opportunities as well, because things have changed, and the people who figure out how to take advantage of the changes before anyone else, and actually capitalize instead of just sort of sitting around and maybe even just feeling bad for yourself are the ones who are going to be a lot stronger on the other side. And so I think to that end, we've really been, I think, working probably harder than ever during this time and getting everybody to be very excited. But at the same time, stressing that everybody has to remain calm. And I think that's something that I've definitely focused on is being very calm. And you have to move very quickly because of things like PPP and EIDL, especially EIDL for an example. We were very fortunate to get what we asked for out of the program, but I know a lot of people who waited even 3 hours longer than we did to jump on the wagon and get applications in and push forward and didn't end up in the same boat. But at the same time, to resist knee jerk, not every piece of news requires a reaction. And when there's such a flood of information, I think that's been a challenge, but one that we try to continue to tell our team to focus on and remain calm, work really hard, and just keep your ears open, but push forward.
So Steve, I know we both are part of one of the networks, at least, where there was all this emails flowing around regarding PPE and how you apply for that, who has missed it, what banks. So has that played into your focus and leadership perspective?
Was that PPP or PPE? The payroll protection program, or PPE? Okay. So that one was actually a really challenging one for us to understand. The program was rushed so quickly to market to try to understand whether we qualified for it. Now, so we're cash flow positive and we're growing. So it wasn't a question of, in light of coronavirus, are we going to become insolvent? That was never a question. But then the question, the way it's worded, the question was, would you otherwise not hire people, or would you terminate people that you might have otherwise not? So we really had to think through what the SBA meant by it, because it's really poorly worded. And then they came out with revision upon revision, which was, slightly clearer than mud, because I didn't want to apply for it and get it and find out that we shouldn't, because, again, we weren't at risk of insolvency. We're going to make money regardless. It's just a question of how much money would we make and would we do things differently? And the answer was yes, it would have a negative impact on us. And yes, we would do things differently. So we presumably are eligible. It would change our view of hiring and not hiring or terminating. So from that standpoint, it was, and yes, I knew as soon as the program came out that, it was going to be a huge rush. So, the bank we normally bank with, Chase, was just not prepared. And they basically gave the guidance, we'll contact you, don't contact us. And we decided that we're not going to wait for this big bank to get their stuff in line. And we went and got it to another bank. But, for the most, it's not, the money's really wasn't necessary, other than we continued hiring people during this time period. We've just added a couple people just in the last few weeks, which is the intention of the program anyway. So I felt that we were being compliant with the intention of the PPP, even if it wasn't well documented. But yeah, we had lots of conversations with attorneys and accountants to make sure that we weren't putting the company at risk, or me personally, since I have to sign off on it.
So since we talked about that, let me also ask you, Steve. So are you raising outside investment, and if so, what are you seeing out there? Or are you, because I think you are also like an angel investor in.
So personally, yes, I'm investing because I think this is a great opportunity because, it's great. A reduced expectation of valuation. I don't know if Andy sees that or not, but for the company, we don't need capital. We generate, pretty decent cash flow, but we are potentially going to raise money because we have an investor that needs to get out. They've been invested in us for many, many years, and it's time for them to get out. So we're looking at potentially raising investment, but we were planning on an exit because both investors have been with us very long, and we haven't gone through a formal process, but we have unsolicited interest in acquiring our company, and we're discussing whether we go through a formal investment banking process. But there's also recognition that valuations are going to be very much tempered. The M&A activity seems to be tempered, and maybe we will hold. Maybe we won't sell because we don't need to sell. So I think we'll choose timing. And if we don't sell and we decide to hold on to the company for a couple more years, then we will be looking at potential acquisitions. So we're kind of in this weird place. We may be raising money. We may be selling the company, or we may be buying other companies. So, and coronavirus is right in the mix of all those things in terms of which direction do we go? Do we do multiple? It's sort of a take it as it comes. We will continue the potential. We will be opportunistic, I guess, is probably the best way to think about it. So we have that flexibility, so we'll probably be opportunistic.
Yeah, so that the opportunistic, I think, is the right word from an investment perspective. And so, Matt, when you look at you certainly talked about how things have slowed down, but at the same time, what are you hearing from the investors when you reach out? Are you even hearing back? Are they responding? And if this what's it from your perspective? What?
Great question. So originally, I didn't anticipate going back out to the market for our raise until August. That was sort of the timeline that we had in mind, because we didn't want to go to any of the investors that were very interested and hear a no because we went too early into the cycle of the pandemic. But in our increased communication with them, we've seen a tremendous amount of support from our investors. And I think, and I won't talk about the specifics of our raise here, but I think that we're in a good position to probably close this summer sometime. And I think that it may even be bigger than we had originally expected. I think that we've seen a lot of interest from the investors who were originally interested in the round and had maybe even put some money in so far or had committed some amount. Some of them have increased the amount that they wanted to invest, and so we've seen really great reception recently. And I can't really talk to how things will change if there are more outbreaks, or if I know that Beijing now has part of the city closed again, so at lesser extent, we'll see if we start to see closures at some point again here, and how that sort of impacts sentiment. We'll just kind of have to keep our finger on the pulse, but generally we've seen really great feedback, not only from investors, but on the advisor side as well. Yesterday, we added a great new advisor, former VP of Connected Fitness Integration and Strategy at Under Armour, who played a very significant role in combining a lot of fitness acquisitions that Under Armour made around 2013 and rolling those into Under Armour. We have one on the sports vision science side that I think will be finalized very soon. And so we've seen a lot of excitement from those around us, and we're happy about that.
So it's Andy, when you look at it from an investment perspective, you kind of briefly mentioned about having to put more money in. When I started my first company, Rollstream, we had when we raised our B round, I think we had a Silicon Valley investor who used to come to every board meeting, and it kind of sometimes it gets irritating. He would write on the board, sell, sell, sell. He said that's all your strategy is all about. You can throw out all the other decks and everything. But at the same time, when you're talking about very early stage companies that's depending on the first round institutional investment, there is still a challenge. I mean, they're not really ready with, or at least many of them are not really ready with the product in a way that it can be deployed to a mass sales force.
That's a great question. I would say, we probably don't take a hard line on the posture of your Silicon Valley investor of sell, sell, sell. Although we do place a lot of emphasis on if you have a saleable product, it is critical to the value of your business that you generate revenue from that. So we don't expect that all the kinks are going to be worked out with the first or the 50th sale necessarily, and everything is dependent on the type of product. So in Matt's case, with the hardware that they were manufacturing and continue to manufacture, there's only so much that they can sell before they create kind of a bad customer, bad user experience by the delays, whether brought on by a pandemic or just the fact that their minimum order quantities need to be met in order to place another order. So there are limiting factors of time that change from vertical industry to vertical industry. Off the top of my head, I can think of two companies that we are working with right now. One is a consumer packaged good item that's a functional beverage. It takes much longer to get to market with something like that. There's more ducks that you need to get into a row, and the temperature of investors really hits a fever pitch once you've gone through formulation, productization, packaging. There's a lot more of the story that needs to be told before you can actually get that beverage on someone's lips. That's the moment of truth when people who you've been courting all along, may open up their wallet and actually make good on some of the conversations. On the flip side of that, life sciences in some cases will enter into animal trials or different things for a drug or a topical thing that to test efficacy and take it to market requires 5 years before you can really even do anything. So if you're in year 2 of a 5-year slog in order to get to a place where you might be able to sell, the advice there changes significantly from that of a SaaS piece of software where, hey, listen guys, limit your roadmap and maximize what you have right now. Like think about other channel partnership opportunities and that type of thing. So I don't know that, to answer your question more directly, I'm not sure that our advice has changed. There have definitely been some I told you so moments for folks that chose to get out over the tip of their skis a little bit in a pre-pandemic state. And now they're starting to realize how valuable that cash actually was. So I think the good news in all of that is that people have a much tighter understanding and a much more accurate view of, what the cash flowing through their business looks like and what they need to do to really be prepared to cinch the belt even tighter if they need to, or take calculated risks when the next opportunity for that comes up. Honestly, Matt and Reflection are a great example of saying, this thing in the form of the in-home version that you can use with an off-the-shelf display was much further into the distance on our product roadmap, but it made logical and financial sense to bring it forward because that gives me the opportunity to create more traction and revenue velocity. And if I can trade this much development for this much potential revenue in a similar space of time, I should make that calculated risk. So their team had been very vocal with us and their other investors about saying, we want to bring this forward because of these reasons. And it's a partnership at that point to say, that makes sense. We can get behind that. So being in a transparent relationship has become a necessity for these folks. And I think that in the end, that's the real value of the investment is like, hey, how can we help you beyond just cutting you a check? Let's be intimately involved in your business in ways that can lead to revenue. But to your point about sell, it's never going to hurt to move more product. It's only going to help. So yeah, we would definitely put our foot on the gas of generating revenue wherever possible, while at the same time being opportunistic to add features when we feel like that is more gasoline on an existing revenue fire. Like, what can we do to create more of that?
So, Steve, putting on your investor hat, you're not the traditional or not the institutional investor. So, take us through the process of.
Well, I would say the two major things that I would look for is, I would say two things. One, the person, right? Or persons. Look at their career, look at the resume, because you can take a marginal idea and product and make it successful, or you can take a really groundbreaking product and turn it into a miserable failure. Execution, managing cash flow, managing pipeline, all of these things are so critically important. The idea isn't, I think sometimes the idea is, not to say the idea is not very important, but I think sometimes it's overvalued. And because, you've heard the terms pivot, with any idea, you're going to come to points in where you're going to have to make decisions. Maybe not a full pivot, but do I tilt to the left? Do I tilt to the right? Do I do this custom development, or do I stick to our SaaS model? It's easy to go take the easy money, but is that really right for long term? So there's a lot of, and I've only learned it by experience, that sometimes you made the right decision, sometimes you made the bad decision, but the experience of having gone through it and really thought through those things, I think is really important. So the person, I think, is of critically importance. The other thing that you can look at projections, whatever. Projections are really pointless because I've never seen a projection that wasn't a hockey stick. And it didn't show profitability by year 3, but it never happens. What is most important is unit economics. How do you make money on one unit, one person, one sale? Everything else, I'm not going to say it'll take care of itself, but everything else becomes secondary. But if you can't show the economics of one unit, one product, one sale, and how that makes money, then that's really at the idea stage. Everything else is scale and scope and managing the process. So those are the things I'd look for. Throughout my career, I've spent time in different industries, so I'm not so industry focused. With that being said, there's certain industries I don't know or understand, like life sciences and things like that. So anything in the business services space, maybe less so on consumer side, because consumers are, there are a lot of peculiarities. But yeah, I would do some in the consumer space, but business services, I sort of understand. I've spent time in that. And, and the other thing I would say I don't look for, I think is overplayed, is this notion of intellectual property, right? As if it's a thing. Now, in certain cases, there's patents, but a patent doesn't mean it's valuable. Now, in certain areas, like sciences, pharmaceuticals, but in business services, consumer, a lot of these things, you can get a patent. It doesn't mean it's valuable. It doesn't even mean it's protectable. So I think a lot of times people overvalue that. The thing that is proprietary, the thing that is valuable, gets back to my first point, is the ability to see a problem and with a team, solve the problem, execute, and then repeat. Find the next problem, and organizations get better, or worse, but some that are doing it because the business world, our worlds in general, change so quickly. So what works now is not going to work a year from now, 2 years from now. So you got to be able to continuously identify challenges, problems, come up with a solution, organize around it, execute, resource against it, and go on to the next one. So you're always going to be facing it. That's intellectual property. You can't quantify it, can't put your finger on it, but that's what you got to be looking for. And it's a people thing. We're a knowledge-based economy. The industry's moving so quickly, taste preferences, technology is moving so quickly. That's the thing you got to look for in an investment rather than the actual product itself.
Yeah, so I think you kind of touched on it briefly about things don't work in business all the time, and things are changing rapidly. And one of the things I'm slightly switching gears in the sense that you keep a lot, or at least I keep hearing, because as part of the Harrisburg University and all these people who are suddenly working or forced to work remotely. Having these challenges of trying to figure out how to do, and there is all these issues around mental health and things like that that's popping up. And I think it was one of our, I think Ted Leonsis, who is the capital owner, who was also an investor in one of my companies, is the one who said, don't worry about failures, or I'm paraphrasing, but he said, don't worry about failures because as a startup, you just need to get it right once. But we all have failures, and when I did the first startup, we were always trying to be always right, and it created so many challenges. So how do you deal with failures? Matt, let's start with.
Sure. So my background is in engineering, and I think all models are wrong and some are useful. And that's sort of the mentality that we take. I mean, we try to solve problems constantly and get the team, whoever is empowered to make the decision, to have a really good rationale behind their decision. And if we buy it, then they'll take a risk. There's always going to be a risk involved, and if they're wrong, we just want to understand why and how we iterate on that, how we make it better. Was there something that we completely missed? Adjust our model and move forward. Everything is iterative, is the way that we look at it. You can't just do something once and expect it to work perfectly. And I think that's a culture that we try to create. Best ideas win. It's maybe a good way of putting it.
So. Right. So, Andy, when I think I have heard this many times, and I'm sure you guys also talk about this, that the investor is like a coach and the founder is the quarterback. All these analogies around there. And given everybody is going through these tough times, have you guys taken a different role? Are you taking?
I don't know that we're seeing anything different. I think that there's a lot more pressure being applied to areas, not unlike other things where you start to see the cracks in the foundation, the more weight that's on top. So I think, not to say that all the businesses are flawed because they have cracks in the foundation. It had more to do with kind of a friendly reminder. Another thing that's very common in particularly early stage startups is that founding a company can be a very lonely place to be because you have very few peers. Obviously, you can speak to this, Jay. Really, all of you guys can speak to this, is that sometimes it's hard to find a support mechanism or someone who can literally just be a listening set of ears that can give back to you a little of what they're hearing you say to help you make clearer sense of it. And so being able to kind of form that type of mastermind with these folks in even a, almost passive friendly way in some instances. In a pre-COVID world, it might be, hey, in fact, I've engaged the guys at Reflection in this, sat down with Matt and their CTO, George, to talk about how can we get creative about attracting talent to their team, specifically software development talent. And that is, something that bubbles to the surface when you kind of put those heads together in that way, helps to galvanize a relationship, even in kind of a fun environment. But now that you're on this kind of like mission critical side of things, to say, I don't know what to do to make payroll. Okay, well, we can hear you, and we can also take a look at, your balance sheet and what you've got going on, and help you make hard decisions that you don't have to feel bad about, because your business is a living, breathing organism. One analogy that I thought was at least helpful to me in contextualizing it is that people oftentimes talk about their business being an organism, a living, breathing thing, which is 100% true. But there's surprising elements to that. Like, you don't ever set out to fail, but as Matt said, like, failure and iteration is an expected part of the process, not something you get surprised by when you don't win this big contract, or, your product launch needs to be rolled back because, there were fatal bugs or whatever it is. That shouldn't come as a surprise so much as part of the process of that organism coming of age. And as humans, like, there's bad bacteria in our bodies all of the time. It's just that the good bacteria is outweighing that. The good is outweighing the bad. And so when you have a situation where the tide turns on that and there seems to be more bad than good, those times more than most, you kind of need an extra set of ears to come alongside folks. So behaviorally, I don't know that we've changed what we're doing, but what we are trying to do is number one, be humble and gracious about how we engage these companies and come alongside them as an ally, just reminding them of some of the basics that really, frankly, need to be ratcheted down much tighter at the foundational level so that they can be really well positioned to come out of this strong.
So, Steve, do you, given your tremendous executive experience, do you stay actively involved with your investments? How much?
Well, a lot of it depends on my availability, my time availability. But it's always easy to give thoughts and ideas, but to get actually involved, I really can't. Sometimes I want to, but I can't. I just don't have the time, because I do have my own company to run, and I have investors. So, to be fair and a good fiduciary to them, I stay focused on sort of my day job. But no, I love giving advice because the experience is, it's important, and I reflect on sort of your earlier point around failure. I have a slightly different view of it. So for me, it depends on your definition of failure, and I'm going to use an analogy. It's like you got to be willing to try things, knowing that some things won't work, but those aren't failure. Now, failure is to be so pig-headed that you're so stuck with your idea that you don't realize that it's time, as much as you believe in it, you're getting all the signals, but you're not willing to pay attention because you believe in your idea. But the thing, I have a saying, I'm like, it doesn't matter how cool you think it is. It matters to your customers, the market, people you're serving. And if you're getting those signals and you're not paying attention to them, that's failure, and that's not acceptable. That's being pig-headed, arrogant, naive, all those sorts of things. But yeah, with everything you do, it's sort of the analogy I'd use, it's like fishing. And you got to throw your line in lots of times. You're not going to catch a fish most of the time. But if you're not paying attention, you're saying, well, I know I'm not going to catch fish every time, so I'm going to keep throwing the line in the same spot. You got to know when to move to a different fishing hole or a different lure. and you got to pay attention and be aware. And I think sometimes, not all, some entrepreneurs, they are so in love with their idea that they miss the opportunities that are presenting themselves along the way, and they're missing those cues that it's not exact. The market doesn't want to buy it exactly the way it's being presented. You may be onto something, but you may have to make tweaks or modifications that isn't the way you thought about it, isn't the way you think it should be. But it doesn't matter how cool you think it is, right? You got to pay attention to your market, to your customers, because they're going to tell you everything you need to know if you're willing to listen and ask about what the product should be. And we use that in all of our product development. It's like, well, look, we could come up with our own ideas and just go forward and put them out there and see what the market, or we could simply just ask our customers and get their feedback. And I think B is a hell of a lot less risky, and you're more likely to hit the mark if you have a discussion. Now, you can't just do it to us. You got to have a relationship with your customer, and you got to be willing to be, I wouldn't say vulnerable, but think, hey, here's some concepts, some ideas that we want to get your feedback on. And kind of conversations you have, because they're going to tell you, they're the ones going to buy it. So.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what Steve said real quickly, Jay, to say that I've often, mentioned to folks that are in our portfolio that, what Steve's touching on is just getting emotionally attached to the concept and how it's being presented to market. And we have to kind of, softly come back and say, listen, data validates emotions. Emotions don't validate data. So in God we trust, everybody else show up with data, because you can't invest in an emotional thing unless there's data to support that. Like, that is the definition of a hunch. And so to be able to peel back the layers of that and get people to see that I think I'm pretty smart and I think that I'm onto something, and I think that more oftentimes than not that's true, but it's not packaged exactly right. And when people talk about, well, what do you mean by product market fit? You have to work at it. Like, two rocks can sit really perfectly next to one another if a skilled mason has done the work to get them to touch just the right way. But it's that finesse process of the fit that makes a big, big difference a lot of times. And Steve mentioned it earlier as well. It's like, maybe it's not a full pivot. Maybe it's just a tweak, or you're turning from one facet to the next. The idea, the fundamentals are still the same, but got to bring the data.
Yeah, this has been a really fascinating conversation for me, because, it kind of brings back memories of our journey, and we're almost running out of time. So I want to, have one last question round, because when Nick and I did our company, we used to write down all these crazy things, quotes, or we made up, or others we heard, which we thought was right. And one of the things I think we wrote, and we strongly believed, maybe later stage into the company, not in the early stages, was the point that you all touched on, is sell the problem that you're trying to solve, not your cool product. So that's something we always used to say. And I think that's the point you're touching on. So for people who are listening in, and because we put this recording out and it gets a lot of people, downloading and listening later also. So a lot of people have ideas. And people always think about, this is a cool idea. What's the one advice you would give to somebody who has an idea and who is thinking, hey, I would like to start this? Or
Sure. On the spot. I think it's sort of along the same line. I mean, my advice would be play devil's advocate, get people who you respect to play devil's advocate, and find answers to those questions. And you'll never have a complete, perfect set of answers to all the reasons that an idea is flawed. But I think in doing that exercise, you can really convince yourself that something is a problem worth solving. And at that point, then it's worth really attacking. And you'll figure out all the reasons you were wrong, and find new solutions to those problems. But that's part of the fun.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice. So, Steve, you kind of talked about.
I have the benefit of thinking about it after Matt got thrown that one. I would say probably know yourself, know what your strengths and weaknesses are, because like for me, I'm really analytical, right? And I can always come up with a reason why it won't work, and I can always come up with a reason why it will work. And sometimes, and I have a saying, I'll say, don't work on your weaknesses, just be aware of them. Don't let them be blind spots. So for me, I know I will at some point second guess, right? And so that would be, could be a weakness if I'm not aware that's just my tendency. And that would be a point in which I'd say, yeah, what, maybe we shouldn't try. Let's just stick to the conservative path, or the path that we know, because I know that's my tendency. But if you know that's your tendency, whether it be finding a co-founder that is like, no, hell no, this is going to work. I'm positive. Come hell or high water, we're going after that. Find someone that's sort of your yin to your yang, or just be aware of these things, because you're going to hit. And I talked to a good buddy of mine who started a company, and he went through a long slug to get to it. And I always loved, because everyone likes to hear the success stories, but I like to hear about those times when he wanted to give up. And he told me about that peace and calm when he decided he was going to give up on the idea. And he went, slept great, and in the morning he changed his mind. And you're going to have that. And, a true entrepreneur can, and I don't know if I quite have that. We'll be able to fight through it. So sometimes for me, and for some people, just know what you're not, what you are and what you're not, and maybe find people that complement you, or make up for those weaknesses that you might have.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a little bit of a continuation of what Steve said, in the sense that you do need to know yourself well enough to know that um, in most scenarios in life, you're going to bring a bias with you, because we contextualize based upon our own experiences. So if you can train yourself to do the work of learning how to ask questions of other people that are non-leading in nature, that don't fulfill the prophecy that you've already put forward, that's an enormous skill that candidly is going to help you in this startup, but it's going to help you in life in general, because it helps to kind of create a bit more of a well-rounded view of how are you contextualizing the information that you're gathering from other people to be, without an inherited bias, or to mitigate that bias as much as possible. That's critically important when you're trying to validate that idea, and limit the amount of emotional attachment that you're bringing to the concept that you have. So I think at the very early stages, it's just generally important to converse with other folks about it. Kind of a freebie alongside of that is, don't get overly precious about your, nothing is more off-putting than a would-be entrepreneur asking you to sign their NDA for an idea that they're about to share with you. But that's for another episode altogether. I think learning the skill and really bringing it to bear, the idea of being able to ask questions in a way that truly solicits insight and information and doesn't just confirm your existing bias, will do you a world of good as you start your business.
So, we're exactly on time. So, Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Steve. This has been a great conversation, and I'm sure the people who are listening in and our wide network would really enjoy this. And I just want to put it out there that the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, the whole idea is to build an ecosystem of people like these that we can reach out to. We have an incubator, and so people who come to us to start companies, we try to connect with them with the right vendors, the right potential investors, all of that. And so these are the kind of people that we are building this network through these conversations. So I look forward to some great companies coming into our fold.
Wonderful. Thanks for having us, Jay.
Reaching out to each of you to hopefully get some help, some guidance.
Since 2001, Harrisburg University has grown again and again. Just last week, the school held a groundbreaking ceremony for its new Health Science Education Center hotel and restaurant. The building will allow for an additional 1,000 students there. Another addition to Harrisburg University, the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, or CIE. This will help students start and build companies. Executive Director Jay Mohan is here to tell me more about it. Can you give just a basic description, sir, of what the CIE is? Just elaborate a little for us.
Yes, so the big goal is to get people who have new ideas, innovative ideas, to get them through to the execution and build out companies. So we hope that the next Facebook, the next Google will come from this region. That will be the great dream that I have. So that's kind of the basic idea. So we provide with guidance on strategy, marketing. We give them the infrastructure to build out the new companies. While it's focused on the students, we encourage local entrepreneurs to come in and take advantage of the facility. That's kind of how we're looking at it.
Why do you think this is needed?
Yeah, so if you think about the economy today, people call it gig economy or automated economy. So things are moving rapidly and changing really fast. So that kind of makes people either terrified or excited. So we want people to be excited about the changes and prepare them how to face these new technologies, how to understand artificial intelligence, data analytics, machine learning, or robotics, and create opportunities from them. So if you look at most of the job descriptions these days, you will always see that they are looking for innovative and entrepreneurial people. So that's what we're trying to build here, and that's why I think it's the need of the day.
Let's talk about some of the highlights. Once completed, there's going to be some really cool things going on there. Tell me about those.
Yeah, so we're going to, so Harrisburg University already have like biotech labs. There's so many different features that we have already built. So the idea here is to connect the makerspace, the active learning labs, all of this together. And this becomes like the coordinating center, which will pull in resources and infrastructure from all across HU. So that's kind of how we look at it. Because my job is to create or empower others. So the tagline that we use for this is empowering innovators to build successful ventures. And that's not just a tagline, that's a commitment we make to anybody who comes in. So that's why we try to have that infrastructure in place.
The advantages for students seems almost obvious, right? But the thing is, this also benefits our region, the Harrisburg region. And can you explain how so?
Yeah, so if you look at, everybody says we want to recreate Silicon Valley. But Silicon Valley has its own unique features. But if you look across the region, you have Austin, which has come up really like a whole lot of innovations, a lot of companies. DC, from where I am, there's a whole lot of companies from that region. So if you look at Harrisburg all over, it's most of the regions where these development have happened, it's around a university, a science and technology university that kind of becomes the hub, and there is all these spokes that develop around that. So that's kind of how I look at it. So Harrisburg and the larger region around that will really benefit from all these entrepreneurs that are coming in with new ideas, and it will create jobs and the economy.
It's terrific. And like I was sharing with you, what Harrisburg University is doing is just remarkable here in our area. Thank you for sharing this latest adventure with us. We'll be right back with our second half hour.
Thank you.